a guy comes bolting down and jumps on stage and starts punching Mr. Rushdie.
More breaking news tonight after author Salman Rushdie was attacked at an event in New York today, according to...
Realizing it's a knife and then realizing he needs help, we all three of us jumped on stage and grabbed the attacker and then pinned him onto the stage. When people need help, you step up and help.
Our guest today is a former Olympian. He's a Hall of Fame speaker, mountaineer, and New York Times best-selling author. He is the always inspiring Vince Poscente. Next on Born to Climb.
I was trying to think, like, what should I talk to Vince Poscente about? Because there's just so many great stories, everything from, I think maybe one of the best things you're known for is going from recreational skier to the Olympics in 4 years. I know you've talked a lot about that. You're just an impressive individual. So anyways, I'd love to talk a little bit, though, about human performance, kind of what this show is all about. We're always better when we have a challenge in front of us, and that's what brings out our best.
Yeah, I totally agree. I wish everybody had that kind of peak performance mentality, but sometimes we just feel like we just need to just show up and do the minimum. And I can't identify with it, but I understand it, if that makes sense. And I think what's lacking is that emotional buzz, that thing where you just go, oh, you wake up in the morning, that's all you think about. So that's where peak performance kicks in.
Yeah, for sure. So I do want to go back to, in a sense, what put you on the map, just this guy. And I think you were living in Alberta at the time, and, skiing as most people in Alberta do. And what gave you this idea just to think, I want to go to the Olympics?
Well, I don't know if you know, I'd raced in luge for a couple of years, but quit. And that was a bit of a pattern of mine. If there was uncertainty and it didn't make sense, even if it felt right, I would walk away because it didn't make sense. It'd have to make sense. And I luged for a while. National team coach more or less said, yeah, no, I've already got a full team and I've got to get them to qualify for the Olympics. I heard that message. A buddy of mine, Bob Gasper, heard that message. 5 years later, I was holding a ticket for the opening ceremonies in Calgary, and I watched Bob Gasper march in the opening ceremonies for the Canadian Olympic team. And there's this notion, I think, in our space that what do you aspire towards? What do you want to create? What do you want to build? What do you want to be a part of? And that whole motivational line of the aspirational pursuit. Yet, most of our big decisions are made when we're uncomfortable, saying this is unacceptable. I can't do it. I can't ever live this way. This is not going to happen. And that sting of regret at the opening ceremonies was so pervasive that it took a few months to flip into I just maybe step in and give it a shot. And so at 26 years old, never ski raced before, and I just wasn't going to go to my grave not knowing if I didn't try, right? I mean, legitimately quit my job, launch into it, and see how I could get from recreational skier to qualify for the Canadian Olympic team. I also knew from my luge experience that in order to compete for Canada, you have to be top 16 or top half in the world. I chose to focus on the top 16 because that was a definitive number. And immediately the competition wasn't local or national. It was not even international. It was the top 16 racers in the world. And how do you compete against those folks? And so that whole process of deciding to go to the Olympic Games and deciding to aim for top 16 in the world made this whole concept of peak performance come to life.
And that's at a time when that wasn't even really talked about. Like, I don't even remember the word peak performance
Right.
back then.
Well, Charles Garfield wrote a book called Peak Performance. I believe that was the title. And he was a sports psychologist, and he was analyzing way back decades ago about the Eastern Bloc and how they were using mental training. And he did a lot of research in that world. And Peak Performance, I think, was the name of that title. So that book really changed my life when it came to understanding that concept.
Yeah, for sure. In the Calgary Olympics, I was a student at the University of Calgary, so we all got kicked out of our dorm rooms, and so the athletes could live there. But you remember the Jamaican bobsled team?
Oh yeah, know them well.
Yeah, they crashed. So Devin Harris, he's going to be on the show here in a couple of weeks. You may know him, but
Hey, hi for me. Yeah, he's a good guy.
for sure, I will. And then you ended up going into speed skiing, which was that new at the time? I don't even know if it's still a sport.
Up until Barcelona, that was how Olympic sports were introduced to the Olympic program. So that's how curling got in, freestyle skiing. Some sports didn't ever. There were demonstration sports that never got in, like high lie. Remember, have you ever seen that where they throw with a curve and a ball, and I don't know.
Yeah.
And speed skiing, the way it worked is the host country chose the demonstration sports that they would include in their hosting of the Olympics. And in the French, every country wants to pad their medal count. So a host country would pick a sport they're strong in, and the French were they dominated in speed skiing. And yet there was one particular Canadian guy that decided maybe that gold medal could go home to his country. So therein lies the story.
Yeah, it's amazing story. When you look back, what was harder, making it to the Olympics in 4 years or building a successful business as an entrepreneur?
The Olympics has a deadline. And for us to have a deadline and work backwards is so prescriptive and really academic in nature. And being an entrepreneur is pretty similar to turning all the lights on and off in a new place and just hitting your shins on the furniture all day long, So I'd say, if you have a relationship with healthy shins, good luck. But they both have their ups and downs, and they both have their merits. But entrepreneurism, it's just a dynamic. And then meeting payroll and fantasizing about getting a paycheck one day. I mean, all that kind of stuff is very, sobering.
Yeah, they don't tell you when you start your own business that you're actually going into sales, and you think, but I suck at sales, but I want to start my own business. So that's the lesson I had to learn the hard way, for sure. Yeah. I remember you were speaking, and then for a while you started climbing mountains. I remember that caught my attention. You were going over the Himalayas. I don't know if you were going with one of your kids. I can't remember, but what spurred that on?
Well, let me back up a little bit, where I had a friend in high school pass away. Her name was Jill Kudrick. She was 17 and I was 16 at the time. And listening to the eulogies for Jill, there was all of a sudden this sense of urgency, a defining moment, a moment of massive discomfort and the sense of mortality. And I made a decision there to do everything at least once. And so as I was living in Calgary, I had friends dying in mountain climbing, and I said, well, everything except that. Well, we have a colleague, his name is Jeff Sauls, and Jeff called me up out of the blue in 2005, I think it was, and said, we're going to an unclimbed peak in the Himalayas. Do you want to come? My first answer was no. And then I slept on it, and I thought about it, and I thought, oh, gosh, okay. So I called up Jeff. I said, yeah, I'll go. And he took a bunch of novices, actually, to the summit of a few of us in the team summited Chakri Peak, and on September 11th, 2006. And 3 years later, he said, you want to go back? Jeff ended up not being able to go, said, would you lead the expedition, my second expedition of my life? And I said, sure. And then after that, our kids are getting older, and our oldest, Max, at the time was 15, 16, and he was just a challenge. I think the medical term is he was a jackass. He was just pushing back on all the rules. He was just saying, I don't want to do that, no, and he thought his dad was not only a dork, but a moron, and And so I floated the idea by him. I said, hey, you want to climb a mountain in the Himalayas? He said, no. Then he must have talked to his buddies. He said, dude, you've got to do this. So Max went up, and he found out quite quickly, as a lesson we have for our kids, lessons, Mother Nature is the lazy teacher's classroom. And to bring a 16-year-old who is fighting all rules, it was a bit of an inflection point for him to go, wait a minute, I don't have to fight. In fact, I can adapt. In fact, it was really, there was this switch that was flipped. And then we have 3 kids, and our youngest, Bella, was dancing ballet 30 hours a week, going to school. It was only dance. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if I took her to the Himalayas too? So she gained a massively formative experience out of that. And then our middle child is more of a room service kind of gal. Yeah. But when she hit 19, she said, I'd like to do that too. So I said, all right, let's go. And so to be able to just provide experiences for our kids was really the motivation. But I'd also led other expeditions with others without my kids. And my wife is actually making noises about saying she wants to go to the Himalayas. I go, all right, but I don't know. That'll be a test.
It's not easy. Yeah, and you don't know how your body's going to react to altitude until you get in altitude. So
yeah, and typically we'll bring on people that are type A personalities of sorts, but good teammates, good team players. And even partway through, people signing up, they start to reveal themselves as not a good teammate, and I just call them back and say, yeah, this isn't going to work. Here's your deposit back. And I get, it's a lot of work. I mean, getting in the permits and getting the team ready on that end of it and all that. But such an extraordinary test of your own abilities. So we may go back one more time in the Himalayan part. And people keep thinking that this is in Nepal where Mount Everest is when you say Himalayas. There's a massive swath of Himalayan mountains ranges in India. And that's where I go. And there's just nobody else there. There's Everest to base camp is like a super highway of people, or Kilimanjaro is another example of just thousands and thousands of people, trying to summit that peak. We go to unclimbed peaks in the Himalayas, and I call it the hero's climb, so that we would name these unclimbed peaks after everyday heroes, not us, take the ego out of it. And I learn as much from everybody that joins this, and the conversations in the tent at night. It's awesome.
Climbing expeditions are transformative. At least I think that. And I've noticed, so in one of my keynotes, I tell the story about us climbing, the highest peak in Bolivia. And there's something about climbing a mountain and struggling, because we struggled. I'm not the hero of that story for sure, but we struggled. But so many people come up to me after, and they'll either say, I want to climb, but I don't think I could, or they'll be like, well, I did climb a mountain. It's not very big, but they just want to let me know. And what is it in the human spirit that craves that challenge, that adventure?
Great question. I gotta think that when we test ourselves, we build our confidence through the experiences we have. And to have your confidence, your wherewithal, your determination tested, that expands that comfort zone, that zone that we each have, where future challenges become less daunting. And you and I probably have had the same experience. You're on the side of the mountain, the weather's horrible, everything's wet, and you go, remind myself why I'm doing this. Like, what is the deal? It's, but in the words of Jeff Sauls, who's now deceased, actually died during COVID, adventure is always better in retrospect. So
100%. To me, it was a humbling experience, because I thought I was stronger until I got on the mountain, and then, just complaining the entire time. At least inwardly, I had enough social sense to, I got to project that I'm not in pain, but I wanted people to quit so we could go down. I just didn't want to be the guy who quit. So, that was me. Um, you spoke about going to this funeral and having this moment of reflection and then thinking, I need to do something. And what do you think it is about moments in life that in a sense shock us out of this comfort zone that we live in and cause us to like, no, I need to make a change.
Well, it related to the comfort zone are the levels of deservability, and this is getting into a bit of the psychobabble part of it. But when we get below our lowest level of an internal feeling of deservability, which is all unconscious, we don't know it until it appears, and you go, wait a minute, I don't belong down here. I belong getting back into that zone where I feel more comfortable. When we're tested, when it gets bad, relationships, finance, health, there is that certain zone where we'll do whatever it takes to get back into that level. Now, some people have a much lower levels of deservability, that zone. And that would explain why people stay in an abusive relationship or any kind of caustic situation. And so why don't you just leave? Well, the zone can be that much lower. So I think that's part of it. And also, what are your values? What are your character traits? I mean, sitting down and really studying what gives you energy. And to find out that, in my case, for example, curiosity, adventure, exploring, testing the limits. And I love the feeling overcoming fear. Love it. That to be on the other side of fear. And do you know John Amat in Calgary?
I know of him. I don't know him.
Yeah, first Canadian to summit Mount Everest. And John is quoted as saying the further, something along the lines of, the further you go away from fear, the larger it gets. The more you go towards fear, the smaller it gets. And that's a saying that is fundamental to me as a father and a person that provides messages out there. Is this one message: never make a decision based on fear, because it will dictate how you engage, and fear will always be leading to a compromised experience, always. So
I want to ask you more about fear, but as you were talking, I just remembered, I did meet John, and because he had an office in Canmore on the second floor, and I was just getting into speaking, and I went to see him. So I remember that now.
Yeah. Great guy.
Yeah, for sure. He was really gracious with his time with me.
Yeah.
So obviously fear keeps people from doing a lot of stuff. You're such an impressive guy. Everything from, being goal directed, making it to the Olympics, and not only in all Olympic sports are impressive, but speed skiing, you got to be a certain amount of fearless to do that, climbing high altitude mountains. So I think a lot of people would look at you to think like, well, do you ever feel fear, and do you ever have hard times? And so let me ask you that. In the last, let's say 10 years,
Right.
what's been the toughest obstacle you've had to face, and how did you get through that?
We spoke briefly about my most recent book called The Earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote that book based on its predecessor that is 20 years older, called The Ant and the Elephant. The ant is the conscious mind. The elephant is the subconscious mind. The ant finds out he's on the back of an elephant, and then he's not going to get to the oasis until he convinces the elephant to go there too, in this parable, this story of the relationship between the ant and the elephant. In 2008, both my wife and I went through an extraordinary financial challenge, because I'd just written The Age of Speed. It hit the New York Times best-selling list. Michelle's business as a speaker's bureau was rocking and rolling, and 100% of our income vanished. It just vanished. And we went through a very difficult time, but no longer was I the primary breadwinner. Neither of us were. and couldn't believe that I couldn't figure my way. I figured out how to get to the Olympics. I figured out how to get into the Speaker Hall of Fame. I figured out how to get on the New York Times bestselling list, and I couldn't figure out this financial situation. And I remember sitting at this desk, I was just crying at my desk going, I have let everybody down. It was horrible. And I realized that what got me here will not necessarily get me there. And that rule of thumb, what got you here is not necessarily going to get you there. And so the opening line of the book in The Earthquake is there's no linear way out of chaos. And you and I are climbers. You and I are goal-oriented people. You and I are very linear-oriented. Yet there's no prescriptive formula to getting out of a hole. The devastation from an earthquake, big ones. In my case, it was financial. Some people lose a child. Some people get cancer. Some people go bankrupt. Some folks just face massive life challenges, health challenges. And to navigate through that was the challenge I had to figure out. And then I couldn't finish the book. I couldn't even write the book until I figured it out for myself, right? And so that's the culmination of what that challenge was, but also the results in the book.
When people are going through an earthquake, as you say, and they have those moments of like, how am I going to do this? Or I want to quit. What's your best advice for people from a resilience perspective? Like, how do people find the strength to stay in the game, keep going, especially when they get to that point where like, oh, I don't think I can do this, doubt sets in. What's your best advice for that?
It's a dynamic. And there isn't even a cliche that says, dig your way out of the hole. No, put the shovel down. Like, put the shovel down. And the best advice I could probably give, because this dynamics is so fluid, is that there's something in the book, I called it the solution loop. And that is, if I had to oversimplify it, it's just a never-ending quest of, does this work? Does this work? Does this work? Does this work? It's also, people will give advice to those who are struggling. Well, just let go. Let go and let God. Let go. Have faith. And yes, that is good advice. But what if you had a knife in your leg and somebody says, oh, just let go, let God? I mean, no, there's a knife in my leg. Like the focus on the pain can be so consuming that no amount of cliched advice is going to take your focus off that pain. And so this process of figuring out how to adapt to that pain, how to actually, the elephant is the subconscious mind. The reason they call it subconscious is it's below consciousness. So you don't know why you have that pain. You don't know what created that pain. It could be childhood wounds, and it could be a brand new one because of this earthquake you went through. So that dynamic of the pain, the dynamic of trying to figure out a new way, and does this work? Lean into that innate personal experience of wanting to be curious, seeking solutions. Can check that box, for you to feel good. Well, I'm curious. I'm leaning into the curiosity. Oh, there's a knife in me, but I'm leaning into the curiosity. So hopefully that answers your question, because it's a very complex situation what you're dealing with when it's that kind of devastation.
Yeah, and your metaphor of the ant and the elephant is awesome. It's such a great picture. I had just interviewed Dr. James Hollis. I don't know if you know who he is, but he is a Jungian psychotherapist. He's written like 20 books, maybe 25 books. I don't know. But one of his books is one of the most impactful I've ever read in my life, and it was called Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life. And so he talks a lot about the power of the subconscious, kind of like your analogy of the elephant. And his analogy is, he says we all are living in haunted houses, and the ghosts are those complexes, those, the traumas that all of a sudden they'll just rise up and take possession, and we'll do stuff that later we'll go, what did I just do there? And it was this, it was us, but it was this subconscious power that came up. And he made one of my favorite quotes of his. He said, anxiety is the price of the ticket to life. Like, in other words, that you want to get awareness of those things, but then you got to make the decision to do it, and you're going to feel anxious, but that's the price to the ticket of life.
Have you seen Inside Out 2?
No.
Oh, you've got to see it. It is the number one, just surpassed any other animated film ever on the planet. Inside Out 2. And one of the main characters, because it's these emotions that are behind the scene. If you haven't seen the first one, then you might not know what I'm talking about. But in Inside Out 2, anxiety shows up. And the subject in this is a 13-year-old girl. Yeah. And we're all driven by certain emotions, And one of them is apathy. Another one is anxiety. And anxiety is just trying to take over. It's just trying to protect, You got to see it. It's genius.
I will. I'll check that out. I was going to ask you about mantras. Do you have a mantra that you use that keeps you in the game?
Yes, I do. And it's, I took a course actually years ago, a self-development course. And one of the modules deep into it, like course number 3, is to come up with that. They call it your question. And the question doesn't necessarily have an answer, but it's a way to live in the question, as they called it, context associated. And everybody came up with their own. Mine was, how will I serve with love? How will I serve others with love? How will I serve myself with love? And if you look not very deep into the whole psychology of the human condition, the opposite end of the universe from love is fear. So here we go again.
Yeah.
A little callback. Fear has nothing to do with great outcomes, and love has everything to do with phenomenal outcomes. So how will I serve with love has been my question. May never have an answer, but I say it prior to every speech. I said it prior to this podcast we have here. I mean, it's a question to live by, at least in my world.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself in the last 2 years?
I'm not done yet. You know how when we're younger, we think, I'm 62, right? And a buddy of mine, same age, he says, man, we're in the 4th quarter. And I went, we are? Hell no. I've got a documentary I've got on the list here. I've got, I don't know, 10 more books in me. I don't know. It's I'm just not done yet. Yeah.
For sure. I always have something to live for. I see photos of my grandparents, and they looked really old. And then I found out, like, they were in their 40s. There's just something about, like, it's a different world today, for sure.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. Helps when you look like the old man from Up for at least 10, 15 years already. So you'll never know how old I am unless I tell you.
That's fantastic. So I got to ask you about the Salman Rushdie incident. I saw that on the news, that some attacker came up and stabbed him. I didn't know until later you were there and actually, like, subdued the guy. So, hey, that had to have been crazy. Walk us through that.
It's nuts. Well, to give a bit of backstory on Salman Rushdie, in 1989, I think it was, he wrote a book that offended the Ayatollah. I believe in the book he would have depicted Muhammad, and that's a big no-no. The Ayatollah at the time put a fatwa on his head, a $3 million, anybody who could kill Salman Rushdie gets the $3 million. And anyway, the guy's still alive, right? Decades later. He has avoided any kind of, he's got death threats and maybe been attacked a few times, but he was speaking in Chautauqua in the Finger Lakes up in northern New York. Now, you want a remote part of the United States, just go up there. I was there with 13 other creatives, and we get together once a year. And one of the attendees, our host, had said, I've got tickets for Salman Rushdie. He's given a speech on, or a presentation on free speech. Oh, I'm in. I ended up being the only guy who took her up on that ticket. Now, this outdoor amphitheater in Chautauqua was on the other side of the lake to our Airbnb. We had rented a pontoon boat, and I had to figure out how to get our pontoon boat unmoored, drive it across to an unknown harbor. I was told it's somewhere across the other side, and then hook it up to that dock, and then make my way up to the amphitheater. And so I left early. Therefore, everything went well. And so I got to the location early, and I ended up sitting in the front row. And it seated about 2,000 people. 10 seconds in to the introduction for Mr. Rushdie, out of the corner of my eye, and everybody's off to the left, a guy comes bolting down and jumps on stage and starts punching Mr. Rushdie. Turns out it wasn't punching, it was a knife attack. The whole thing was shocking. What I'm describing took all of maybe, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Realizing it's a knife, and then realizing he needs help. And about the same time, a gentleman on my far left and a gentleman on my far right, we all three of us jumped on stage and grabbed the attacker and then pinned him onto the stage. Very aware that the guy had a knife, very aware he didn't want to get stabbed. But Rushdie was alone on stage. He was stabbed 15 times, I believe. He lost his eye. He got stabbed in the neck. But there was an older crowd and a lot of retired medical professionals in the audience. So those folks jumped in and helped Rushdie, and we had pinned down the attacker until the police were there. It just took him a minute to get on and handcuff the guy, and then I wasn't needed. Was sitting there, and there was blood all over. Oh, yeah. And decided just to leave. I didn't want to be part of the gong show that was about to happen. And got in the pontoon boat. And it was very cathartic going across the lake with the wind and just taking a beat and going, what just happened? I mean, yeah. So anyway, when people need help, you step up and help.
I always wonder about those moments when something just so unexpected happens and in a very real way, surreal. And people have different reactions. Some run away. It's like some run away from the noise, some run to it, like in the Boston Marathon. I remember that. People running to the explosion to go help. Other people, their instinct is just to run away. Were you surprised at yourself after when you kind of looked at that scene that, hey, that happened, I ran into danger and helped that guy?
You don't like you just said, you don't know until you're faced with that situation. But in the same breath, I'm not surprised. There's a few advantages along the way here, and I'm going to say this as briefly as possible, but know that there's whole stories behind what I'm about to say. So when I was 7, I wouldn't jump off the high board because I was too scared. So I don't have that gene in me that I do feel fear. I do want to minimize risk. I learned how to parachute in Australia. It's a day, in the morning, they teach you how to parachute, and it was a static line where the parachute deploys after you get away from the plane about 30 feet. You're on your own. The main chute deploys. Second jump, I wanted back in, wanted to do it again. Parachute didn't open. And that emergency procedure of the yellow ring, extend, you extend, jettisons the main chute, extend again, the reserve chute follows. The reason I bring that up as I realized I could handle any stressful situation. Looking back at 21 years old, plummeting towards the earth, I went, well, the solution is this yellow ring right here. Extend, extend. And so that always had me know that I'll figure it out when I get there. I'll figure it out. And that Salman Rushdie situation, I remember thinking that. I don't know anything about stabbings. I was going back to my martial arts, training a little bit with the 4-5 steps that between the front row and Mr. Rushdie and the attacker, I should say. And then the experience with speed skiing. I mean, and I let me add this, James. When people see us speed skiing, they would go, I'd never do that. Well, we didn't start there. We started very low and got comfortable with that speed at 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour. And when you go 100 miles an hour on skis and you go back to 60 miles an hour, you're looking at little rocks, or you see things that you're very aware of. It's the same when you were learning how to drive, right? You'd take you back. The first time your folks, or your dad probably, or mom, was teaching you how to drive, he was saying, look at the pedestrian over there. Make sure you look at the traffic. If it turns yellow, look at the person on the other side. Somebody might come up from behind the car. You're looking at all this information at 30 miles an hour going, then you go on the highway at 60 miles an hour, and then you come back to 30 miles an hour in your, formative years as learning how to drive, and you see the pedestrian over, you see the light over there, you see that somebody that could come out from behind a car. So with experience comes an expansion of that ability. And so if that answers the question, was I surprised that I jumped on stage? No. And I'm not surprised that some people were frozen in place, because there's a part of the brain, the amygdala, and it kicks into fight, flight, or freeze. This blocks any kind of cerebral notions until you're oxygenating the system. We have an automatic response to stressful situations with shallow breathing. Shallow breathing triggers the amygdala, and you're automatically in fight, flight, or freeze. And actually, somebody pointed out that just look at a rabbit. It's actually freeze, flight, or fight is the actual sequence of mammals, right? Is humans, is that we will first freeze, which is what happened for most everybody in the stadium. And flight was the second one that some people did leave immediately, like they're, get me out of here. And then a number of us jumped on stage. So, yeah.
Well, good for you. Amazing. And amazing to jump in so quick. That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah, he's alive today, so he owes me a beer. If you're watching, Salman.
For sure, you got to get that message through to him. Hey, I was one of the guys, and just as we close out our time here, I did skeleton sledding in Calgary, and I just like one of these 3-day courses, and it was terrifying, completely terrifying. And
started low though, right?
We did. We started a quarter way, then halfway, and we got to the top. And I am definitely afraid of heights, which makes people, why do you climb mountains? But it's for that very reason, because it scares me. But back to one of your points, when you get past that fear, that's this incredible freedom that you feel. The only problem I find is then after I get back, I got to go do it again. I got to go through the fear again. So it just seems to always be there. I wanted to close out though, since we're out of time here. And my career started in ministry. I've sort of followed in John Maxwell's footsteps, right? I was a preacher. That's where I got all my time on stage. But as I started transitioning into speaking to the corporate world, it's a completely different thing, right? Speaking to the church audience is actually pretty, it's a pretty safe place. People are, encouraging you. And then you get to the corporate world and nobody's saying anything. It's quiet. And for some inspiration, I think it might have been Jane Atkinson. I don't know if you know Jane, but she put me onto you. I was watching some of your videos for your keynotes, and with you up on the chair and describing the speed skiing, yeah. And so I incorporated some of that in for me. Mine was about climbing mountains, but I pulled chairs on stage. But all of that's from you. That was inspired by you early on, and that gave me in a sense, the courage that like it's okay to do something crazy on stage, because that otherwise would not be my nature. So, anyways, I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, Vince, thanks for making time for me. It was really good to be able to have a chance to finally meet you, especially since we're from the same part of the world and in similar careers as well. You're an inspiration for sure in all that you've done. I wish you all the best with the next climbs. If you need some climbing partners, you have my email.
Well, let's stay in touch for sure, because it's such a great part of the world to have a truly pristine experience in the mountains. No city lights, no electricity, no people, pack in, pack out. And there's such a great support network of porters there that, I will let you know that Sunshine Himalayan Adventures, I think, will take you to the outfit that I've worked with. So great guys. Fantastic.
Nice. Excellent. Thanks again, Vince.
You're welcome.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Vince Poscente, and there were so many great things that he said in there. And for me, a couple of the takeaways were just the importance of embracing challenges, regardless of what that might be. Also, the importance of resilience, especially during life's earthquakes, and the transformative impact of facing your fears head on, whether that's conquering the fear on the side of a mountain or confronting a life-threatening situation. And lastly, I was struck by Vince's mantra, how will I serve with love? You know, it's a powerful reminder that it's love, not fear, that should guide our actions and our decisions. Listen, thanks for joining us on this episode of Born to Climb. And if you found this conversation inspiring, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We have some incredible guests to come. And remember, the path to greatness, it is a climb, but it's one worth making. And until next time, keep climbing.